Moses, how you doing?
Very good.
It's nice to see you 30 years later.
Well, nice to be back.
I'm surprised that you're not on a wheelchair. One may imagine that 30 years down the line, you are old and broken.
Well, I had an early head start. So by the time I was here 30 years, I was just getting out of my late teens when I started working on Omo Picker Box.
On Omo Picker Box.
Yes.
That was quite a show.
It was.
Welcome back home.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, next to Moses, he's a CEO, by the way. He has transitioned. He's now the CEO or managing director of Basigo Company, which in East Africa. Thank you. We'll be discussing more about that, Moses.
Thank you.
And just next to Moses, we have Priscilla Okutoyi. He's a manager for banking and financial services at MSC. Thank you very much indeed, Priscilla, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I basically want to pick up your brains on the president's visit to the U.S. Today is the culmination of his 4-day visit to the U.S. He's going to have that much expected talks with President Joseph Biden. And what are you looking forward for out of those conversations, Priscilla?
I think this visit has been very timely. Just looking at the press and what the president has been able to achieve, he's been able to bring stakeholders from the U.S. that are interested in technology. Just as you had mentioned before, visiting multinationals such as Microsoft and Coca-Cola, of course, gives Kenya a head start to be able to bring investments to Kenya. And it's really important that the president is able to sell Kenya as an investment destination of choice. Yeah.
Very good. Moses, I mean, yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? He visited the Tyler Perry studios, and I saw Tyler Perry saying, I mean, he regrets missing that meeting with the president. And of course, later on, he had a conversation with basketball legend Shaquille O'Neal. There are reports that he's expected to come to Kenya sometimes in August. What is your thought on this?
I think it's consistent with what the president has been saying. He's been very vocal about the creative economy and leveraging the fact that we've got a youthful population who are already in that space creating their own content. So this just gives impetus to that. They're looking at what is the next level. So if we can get our creatives from here and they are able to collaborate with now these world-class studios like the studio he visited, excellent. On the other hand, I know the NBA has created roots in Kenya, and basketball is a growing sport. So I think it's just echoing that there are certain things that we maybe in the political noise locally kind of get lost. But once the president's got this international, this world stage, we are able to actually decipher what are the real policy initiatives against all the other noise that happens. So I think so far I'm enjoying just following the tour because what is coming out of there is very clear and very precise in terms of direction. I think when we're here with our own other issues, we sometimes don't hear what is being said.
I mean, forget about the hoopla, the noise, and the photo ops, that we've been seeing. What is this one concrete thing that you would expect that will have a lasting legacy on the U.S.-Kenya relationship going forward?
I think from the business roundtable yesterday, and we are privileged as Basigo, our CEO was there. I'm actually the MD of Basigo Kenya, but our CEO was in the roundtable that was attended by both President Ruto and President Biden. One of the big things that came out of there is increasing the investment from the U.S. to Kenya. So we are looking at making Kenya an even more attractive investment destination, especially in the areas of technology and finance and that kind of area. So I think it's good signaling, just putting Kenya on the map, or just taking up our space as the investment destination of choice for American capital.
What about Okutoyi?
Yeah, I agree with you, Moses. Just still adding on the same, Kenya has been sold as the Silicon Valley of Africa. So the president being in the U.S. right now just present an opportunity for the technology in Kenya to be able to be enhanced, so to bring more investments and capital in that space.
Do you expect any significant pronouncements around electric mobility?
Definitely, yes. I'm expecting. I haven't had anything yet, but I'm expecting. Because one of the things, as we go on with the discussion, you realize that e-mobility, one of the challenges that you're having is financing. So being able to get investment from the US will really be important and be able to drive the e-mobility agenda in Kenya.
Very good.
Yeah.
Let's now dive deep into the issues that brought us here. That conversation around the visit to the White House by President William Ruto. We'll be giving you more information. At some point, we should be going to Washington, D.C., exactly at the White House, just to listening to that conversation. And, of course, we'll break down the issues that will be discussed by President Joseph Biden and President William Ruto. I want to hear from you, Derito. Can you just take us through the current status of the e-mobility industry in Kenya?
So, e-mobility is, I think, the oldest company that's that's operating here is around 5 years old. So e-mobility has been taking root for the last 5 years. But we have seen the biggest growth in the last 2 years. And we are divided into, it's not homogeneous. So we divide, internally we divide ourselves into different categories. So we've got the two-wheelers, those are your motorcycles and your bicycles. And then what we prefer to call the four-wheelers is now what I'm doing, buses and commercial vehicles and also passenger vehicles. We have the guys who are doing charging infrastructure. So that's either fast or AC charging or DC charging and also battery swapping. Within that same ecosystem, then you have guys who are doing carbon credits. And now we're even seeing an entry into the three-wheelers, tuk-tuks. So there's the mobility side, and then there's also the services that go around with this, with the mobility. Currently, there are around 40 different companies that are in that space. Majority are in the two-wheeler sector, maybe motorcycles and bicycles, and a few of us who are in the four-wheeler sector, but growing at a very rapid pace. So in a nutshell, that's basically the lay of the land of what e-mobility is. We have seen tremendous growth, I mean, just from even for the last 12 months or 11 months, from the last budget cycle to this, we've seen a huge growth, and that growth keeps, we believe, will continue in the near future.
Just to take you to yesterday's CEO's roundtable in the US, the president talked about some of the policies that his administration has put in place to ensure the growth of electric vehicles in the country, and he said that the first 100,000 vehicles to be constructed in Kenya or to be manufactured in Kenya will be exempted from all taxes and levies. Do you expect these to help this industry and see big companies like Build Your Dream or BYD from China, coming up and setting up their base here in Kenya?
Yes, I think that is really, really important, because currently in the e-mobility space, there are many people who are assembling, and those people who are assembling normally have to import most of their parts from either India or China to be able to assemble locally. So being able to do that, the whole manufacturing from Kenya, that means we have more jobs. That also means we reduce most of the costs that are involved in importation charges.
Derito, I know you're into assembling of electric vehicles, and one of your flagship brand is the Basigo. How is this pronouncement expected to spur you and motivate you now to go into full-scale manufacturing of electric vehicles in Kenya?
I think what we've been clamoring for is a conducive environment. Being a new industry, you can imagine even those legacy automobile companies in the e-mobility space, like you're talking about BYD and others, before they set up here, they want to be in a position to know that the market will accept their products, that they have been able to do enough R&D for local conditions. And I think now that gives them that opportunity to be able to start looking at this as a destination to bring their investment. So, I mean, if I give our example, before we even started assembly, we were actually running a pilot for 2 years where we had buses on the ground operating, understanding what could go wrong, what are the supply value chains that are available locally, what are what are the conditions of these vehicles to operate? Can we actually get the mileage we want? And then that's when now you move to the next step, where it's manufacturing. So as we are deciphering what the pronouncement, we welcome it, but we're also now hoping to see what happens in the immediate short term, and then what happens in the medium term, and then in the long term. The long term objective being that we are moving those supply chains here, that all those vehicles can be done both for Kenya and the region, and Kenya becomes a hub for actually local manufacturing and assembly of vehicles. But we still have to deal with a short-term problem, which is the R&D. So for example, the guys doing motorcycles, it's taken them between 3 to 5 years to just get the product right, because the product we use here, and compared to how you use a motorcycle in China or in India they use motorcycles for personal commute. Here we use motorcycles as commercial vehicles, so you can't just take the vehicle from that market, bring it into this, and then put it out into the market. So there is a bit to decipher, but I think it's preaching to the choir. We are excited and singing hallelujah.
Even as you sing hallelujah, I mean, look, last year the government removed excise duty on electric vehicles. It's lowered from 20 to 10%. What has been the impact of this?
So actually, excise duty was removed a bit earlier. So what last year, it was removed in 2019. What last year the finance bill, which is our current finance act, did is they removed VAT and in 3 categories. And the first category was bicycles, electric bicycles, and then there was motorcycles and electric buses, and as well charging infrastructure. What has that done? Immediately we can see, if you think about, go back a year ago, delivery in Nairobi was predominantly motorcycles. Now you are seeing more bicycles. Bicycles is an easy entry into a delivery business, last mile deliveries, and bicycles are actually more efficient. So those guys doing deliveries of your KFC, of your groceries on bicycles, on electric bicycles, are actually being able to earn more per kilometer, because they're using a much cheaper mode of transport. In the same breath, we have seen an increase of motorcycles in that space. So that also, and more players coming in and now moving from just doing fully built units and beginning to set up assembly plants here as that value chain. On ourselves, that has given us the opportunity to be able to lower the price to the end consumer, because the buses we're building are for the matatu industry. That immediately brought down that price by 18%, by 16%. That made it more affordable, because whenever you're talking mobility, you always have to remember that the biggest challenge is the high upfront cost. Electric vehicles are expensive, but expensive to buy, but very cheap to run. But that brought the price down. We were able to pick orders. Speaking as Basigo, we were able to actually get 500 orders, and these are people who have paid the deposits. So right now the current
500 orders.
500 orders, and we had to stop taking orders.
Oh, you had to stop?
Yes, we had to actually
That's
stop
how
taking
big the
orders.
market is.
Exactly. So now those are the orders we're trying to fulfill in the next year, in the next 12 to 18 months. And you can.
So you're not taking new orders?
Right now, we wouldn't be able to take new orders, because we have to ramp up that local production to a point whereby we do not disappoint the customer. And remember, this is a market that has choice. If we don't deliver, they'll move to somebody else. So if the guys doing motorcycles don't deliver, there is a different alternative.
Yes.
Be it might be a one that is polluting the environment. So we have, all of us in the e-mobility industry are working very hard. And so what we are looking for is an opportunity whereby we know for the next 3 to 5 years that we've got a stable fiscal policy, we've got a stable incentive policy that allows you to invest accordingly. So yeah, so that way you're not, every budget cycle, you're not going back to say, oh, what we got last year, please can we keep it and can we have a bit more? Yeah, and that way we'll spur investment.
Priscilla, I like the fact that he's bringing in the whole idea of how big the market is here in Kenya, and the fact that they are not taking in new orders, I mean, is a testament, that there is a huge demand, for electric vehicles in this market. In 2023, almost 3,000 electric vehicles were imported, and that shows you that there is tremendous potential. And then there goes the question: then how do we protect the growth of this industry, because it's quite nascent? by ensuring that we have the right legal framework in place and predictable policies in place at the same time?
Thank you so much for that question. So just to begin where you've stopped at policies. Policies are very important to be able to advance this sector. So we need policy incentives for fast to be able to just support the industry. So the policy, for example, just what Mr. Director has mentioned, the policy should not be for 1 year, for example. We need extended periods to be able to support the manufacturers and the suppliers to be able to serve their end users. Secondly, just to add on that, on policies, we also need legal frameworks to be able to support new entrants. So, for example, just Basigo has already built their infrastructure. If another entrant comes into the market, do they have to build the infrastructure from scratch? They should be able to leverage what is already in the market for them to be able to advance even faster. So policies are very important. We also need, financial incentives. So can we give grants? Can we also have partnerships, for example, with county governments? Because you see, there's a lot of electric mobility in Nairobi, but in the counties, not so much is happening. So, for example, can county governments provide land so that at least operators like Basigo can be able to go and set up shop there just for free for some time and just be able to get some capital incentives to support also youth empowerment. The other thing that can be done in that space is also technology transfer, as well as training of young people just to go into that space. You'll realize as much as e-mobility is really new, we don't have many people with the technical know-how to be able to service that space. So can we have also many more people being trained on how to support that industry? Yeah.
Just to give you some back-end information, I'm privy to the information that there is a major manufacturer of electric vehicles who is seeking to set up shop here in Kenya. They have gone to the county of Nakuru. They have gone to the green energy hub of Naivasha, whereby they are looking to see whether they can set up their base there. Then what do we need to do, Derito, just to get many players in this market? Because, look, the EV market is being driven by two players. You have Tesla and you have BYD. BYD has overtaken Tesla, which was the market leader, for quite a long time. And BYD is in the African market looking for a place where they can set up shop. They have gone to Morocco. They have gone to South Africa. I'm not sure whether they have come to Kenya. But what do we need to do to get the big boys of EV into the Kenyan space?
I am privileged to have been in China a week ago. And what did I see? As big as BYD is, I was surprised by how many other players there are. And these are serious players. So I think maybe we don't need to focus on the big two. There's lots of players who are actually maybe more nimble, who actually can create a product that is more centered to us, because that can actually be adopted easier. What do we need to do? I think for Kenya, it's a no-brainer. One, our energy is already 90% green. So if you're looking from an environmental point of view, this is the place to be. What is our biggest challenge? When you're looking at our motor industry, 90% of all vehicles on our roads are imported second-hand. Yeah? And those are going to start drying up. So we have no choice, but because if you look at the policies and regulations that Europe is putting, and Japan, second-hand vehicles, they're especially with the extended user responsibilities, they will not be able to dump those vehicles that they have already used to end of life onto Africa. So we have no choice but to be able to say that now we are not going to be consumers of second-hand vehicles. We are going to be consumers of brand new, and those brand new vehicles will be electric. Why? We have the power. We have a lot of green power that's available. And more than that, we have more power at night. And if I give you an example of a matatu, if you buy a matatu today, 6.6 million shillings, and you give it a life of 8 years, in 8 years you'll have spent 15 million shillings worth of diesel.
Yep.
If you buy an electric bus, you will pay 15 million shillings upfront, so more expensive. But what will you have spent? You will have spent in its 8 years 8.6 million shillings worth of locally generated power. So which is a better deal? Where you spend 6 million shillings in Kenya, and then exported 15 million shillings in buying fuel, or where you actually spent 15 million shillings to bring a more expensive vehicle, but all the energy came from Kenya. It's all local energy. That is the biggest selling point what we have. And we must look as a country, what is our competitive advantage? Our competitive advantage is the fact that we have a young population that is tech savvy, that wants the next big thing, and the next big thing in mobility is electric mobility. We have abundance of energy resources that are green. That those are the resources that are going to power the next set of mobility, or the current set of mobility. So that is where we must play. And then now is to create that conducive atmosphere that Tesla can come and create a Tesla vehicle for the African market. Use Kenya as the testing ground, and then use it as a springboard to then move to the rest of the AFCTA or the entire African continent. If we look at Kenya only, I think we lose the point. We have to actually look at Kenya as being the hub to be able to do the assembly and manufacture, and then move it into the region or the hinterland around us.
And I like the fact that you appreciate that, you know, let's face it, I mean, electric vehicles, you know, the entry cost, you know, it's expensive when you compare it with other fossil fuel-driven vehicles. But why are they expensive, by the way?
That's a very simple one. Our ICE vehicles, or ICE vehicles, we've been building them for 100 years. The technology is so mature. So if you're doing a diesel engine, you've been building this diesel engine and just doing, you know, periodic improvements over the last 8 years. So that's a very mature industry. Now you're coming to an industry that is 10 years old. Even in those the developed world, it's 10 years old. So far, the technology is still very expensive. Of course, the beauty that's what's happening is the battery prices are reducing dramatically. So battery was the biggest cost, because technically the rest of the components are the same. You're using the same rubber for tires, you're using the same aluminum or alloys for the body, but the battery costs are coming down, and they're coming down dramatically. And what is happening else is also economies of scale. If you're producing 500 or 200, you don't have that. You don't have the muscle to negotiate compared to a Toyota that is doing millions. But now, what you're seeing with BYD and Tesla, as acceptance, as they've got to a level of acceptance, they're able to negotiate better rates. They're able to bring their cost of their prices. So prices have been going down. BYD has actually, prices have been going down, while every other type of vehicle prices have been going up. And that's actually, it's a matter of scale. And yeah, it's economies of scale. That's what's actually going to give us that impetus and make it affordable.
Priscilla, I want to hear this from you. Look, you know, last year, the government reduced excise duty from 20 to 10%. This was expected to spur the growth of electric vehicles into the Kenyan market. President Ruto, who's in the US, is also talking about exempting all Kenyan manufactured EV vehicles from any form of taxes, you know, for the first 100,000 vehicles. You know, that's a significant number. But when you go through the finance bill, which is undergoing public validation, the Parliament is seeking to introduce, or the National Treasury wants to introduce what they are calling the eco-tax. Okay? And on top of that, they want to introduce VAT on electric bikes and buses, together with solar and lithium-ion batteries. Is the government blowing both cold and hot, preaching water and at the same time taking a glass of sweet red wine?
That is really, really a complex situation. Just as you have said, we have the battery costs are currently around 50% over and above the cost of the vehicle, for example. So that's how the battery is making the vehicle to be expensive, just as my colleague has mentioned. And then on one hand, this eco-tax, on the proposed bill, we have 750 shillings per kg of any battery to be able to, added as tax onto the original price. So you can imagine how much that compounds the price. So indeed...
So wait a minute. Sorry for stepping on your shoes, but help us understand here, because I didn't see it from that angle.
Yeah.
So you buy the bus, or electric bike, you pay VAT on the bus. And then after buying the bus, you also now pay another VAT tax on the lithium-ion battery. Is that
and an eco-tax per kilogram of the battery.
Per kilogram of the battery.
Per kilogram
of the battery. So assuming most batteries, let's say for a vehicle, that be around 12 kgs.
How many kilos?
A motorcycle is, you are talking about between 10 and 20 kilos.
20 kilos.
Yes.
So you multiply by 750. But it's going to be added onto the final product.
Now, if you want to see how that gets really, take a bus. The buses we're building, one battery pack is 223 kilos.
200?
One. The bus has 6.
Oh, Lord.
So when you do the math...
When you do the math. And
help us do some quick calculations. So that comes to how much? So you have six
So batteries. You're saying, let's say 200. Let's give it a 200. Let's round off. Times 750. Okay? That's already 15,000 bob.
That is for one battery?
No, that's 150,000 bob.
150,000
bob. For one battery. Times 6.
Oh, that's tax on the battery.
That is tax on the
battery.
So times 6.
Times 6. So you're talking about another, basically it's 1 million shillings.
So that's 1 million bob.
So you've made an already expensive product even more expensive in the name of the environment. But this is the vehicle that is using locally generated renewable energy.
So, because when we're talking environment, we want to reduce CO2 emissions on the environment. So that is the whole point of going green with e-mobility. So it beats the purpose for us to, on one hand, we want to reduce CO2 emissions, but on the other hand, making the barriers of entry very high, because that will make it very difficult for operators to get into the industry.
Derito, have you talked to Parliament over this?
Well,
to the Budget Committee.
So we have, as the Electric Mobility Association of Kenya, where I am, now it's Vice President, no longer Vice Chair. So we have put in our basically our submissions to them and in writing, and we've also then raised that with the parent ministry, which is the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industrialization, and as well with the e-mobility task force, to just be able to say that yes, one thing we must acknowledge, that government is run using tax, and that has to happen. But then we also must then see is it a progressive tax? Is it in line with what the government is saying, as you rightfully put it? So I think what we are trying to say is if we're going to drink sweet red wine, let's all drink sweet red wine. This water business, let's leave it on the side.
Have a situation whereby but some people are drinking water,
exactly,
and others are enjoying well-chilled red wine.
Exactly, and it's the same thing. I had the chair of the Finance Committee saying that the reason why there is a 2.5 circulation tax is because of to curb emissions. And then I said, so why is then that also being put on the vehicles that that actually reducing, are not emitting? So I think there is maybe a blanket way of looking at things. Let's just put it across. Maybe it's easier to in administration, but I think it's ill-advised, and I'm hoping that during the public participation and because of the pronouncement the President has made, we believe that this is something that will be reversed and needs to be reversed. Otherwise, we will actually be killing an infant industry.
You see, in that meeting where the President made that pronouncement, in the House, there were top officials from the National Treasury. This bill is drafted by officials from the National Treasury. Is the President privy to what the National Treasury is doing in the background?
I hope that's to you.
Wow. Honestly, there are very many different task forces that have been formed in the e-mobility space. So I hope my colleague, Mr. Derito, is able to, just push for the President to be able to renegotiate and be able to just change some of these.
Well, let me put it this way. I believe, I honestly and hand on my heart, believe that the president is a proponent of e-mobility. And I'll give you an example. In the last finance bill, 2023, there was nothing on e-mobility, but it took the president's pronouncement in Madaraka Day in Kirinyaga for us to get the incentives we got. So I also believe now, he's said it twice in the US, that the president's pronouncement will actually move the needle, and some of these incentives will come back, and we will at least retain what we got last year and maybe get some more, so as to be able to accelerate to this number. And I like that number. We have a specific number, 100,000. So what we should be worrying about as industry, what we should be discussing with Treasury, is what do we need to do from where we are to get to 100,000. And that's, I think, that is an excellent conversation.
I mean, we should not even talking about where we are, because we are nowhere. Number one, we don't have any locally manufactured electric vehicles. What we have are assembled vehicles. So we don't, number one, let's get everything clear. We don't have vehicles manufactured in Kenya that are electric. So when the president is talking about 100,000 electric vehicles being manufactured in Kenya, then, Okutoyi, what do we need to do then to ensure that we get players who will set up their base here to start the manufacturing of electric vehicles in Kenya?
Yeah, so much has to be done for us to be able to get, international players, and also being able to support the currently available local players. So, number one, let's start by building the ecosystem that is already existing in Kenya. So we can start by supporting the current supply, on the supply side, companies that are already assembling. How can they be able to manufacture those parts here locally? So looking at just backward linkages, we need to upskill and upgrade, for example, the steel industries. We need to be able to get technology from the countries where we have been importing these parts. So being able to get the technology first from abroad, from the countries where we have been importing these parts, and then being able to also support the local ecosystem. So once we do that, then we can be able also to invite other players from abroad to be able to set shop here in the country, so that we don't also kill what is already existing in Kenya.
Yes.
If I just chime on that, I think I take the view of that sometimes we very liberally use manufacturing and assembly interchangeably, because what we've had in Kenya for 50 years is a vibrant assembly business. Started 50 years ago with AVA and KVM, and then that has been put under a lot of pressure because of the fully built units, second-hand units that we import. So I believe when the president's talking about this, I think he's also looking, as we are moving towards manufacturing, we must start at assembly. Now, why is assembly important? Because assembly is labor intensive, and there we can leverage. We have, the one thing we have is very good skilled labor, or labor that is, the Kenyan youth is like a sponge. You can teach him to put something to build these vehicles very quickly. And we have seen it with what we are doing with buses at KVM. We are able to ramp up that very quickly. So if we can start with making ourselves competitive to assemble for Kenya and for the region, and then now we can start looking at, can these battery components be assembled here? What parts of the electric vehicle value chain can be manufactured here? And then build that slowly. If you look at what Morocco did, Morocco has had a 10-year plan, and that's what we require. We require a 10-year plan.
Help us understand here. You are in the business of assembling vehicles. Is it possible to, or how is it possible to transition into a manufacturer?
Not as easy, because manufacturing then brings a whole new level of regulation. So for example, we are assembling buses from an existing manufacturer who has gone through the entire homologation process out there. All the standards have been set. He has met the EU standards, he has met the American standards, he has also met the Kenyan standards. So we are then taking something that's already, all the R&D has been done. What they're doing is then tweaking it for local conditions, and we then assemble that. So we bring the battery components separate, we'll get the motors separate, and they all come as a complete knockdown kit. And all that comes together here here in an assembly plant in Kenya. It is the same thing we are seeing with the likes of the Isuzus, with the likes of Mitsubishi, with the likes of the Tatas and all the other vehicles being done at AVA and Toyota. That is, and there we have a competitive advantage because that industry is vibrant, exists, there is plants already. Now, if you want to become a manufacturer, if you look at a lot of the manufacturing, it's completely automated as we speak. So that means you're bringing a much higher level of investment. I am not saying it's not possible, but we have seen in the current value chain where certain things used to be imported and then suddenly, and then over time we start getting local value chains, and that you find that certain parts, for example, if we take the motorcycle industry, the seats, the side stands, some of the mainstays on the motorcycles are actually now being manufactured here. And that has taken some time for them to get to that point. So what we need to do is say, this is where we are. At the moment, we are not competitive as a manufacturer, but we can be competitive as an assembler. Set a target that in 5 years or in 3 years, we must be able to manufacture certain components and then move and keep that.
You make it progressive.
We make it progressive. And then now we can leverage what you are talking about, going to that economic zone in Naivasha where the power is lower. So manufacturing requires a lot more power. And then we can, we'll get there. And I believe we can.
When you look at the Kenyan market, Okutoyi, are we primed for that much talked about e-mobility takeoff?
Yes, we are. Okay, first, just to begin with, there's been a lot of conversations about going green, about climate change. So I think e-mobility is one of the areas in which is ready and being able to create green jobs. By going into the e-mobility space, we are able to reduce greenhouse gases. So Kenya is really ready. There's just a lack of awareness of e-mobility. Most of the times, let's say when you go to your nearest boda shed, very few of them will be having electric bodas. Most of them are still using fossil fuel. So indeed, there's a lack of awareness, and a lot of investment is needed for us to be able to raise this awareness countrywide and just show the benefits of going with e-mobility, so that from the consumer perspective, they can be able to understand that it's more important for me to make this initial heavy investment and get these electric boda or electric vehicle, and with time these costs are going to reduce. The operational costs are really low. So understanding those benefits, especially from the consumer side, is still what is lacking for us to be able to take off. Yeah.
But yes.
I think when we started, you alluded to my age, but let me use let me use that to my benefit.
Yes.
If you had asked somebody that same question, is Kenya primed for mobile telephony 30 years ago?
Yeah.
Why would my mother have wanted a phone? We had a phone connected on the wall. Why would she want to
landline?
Yes. Why would she want to walk around with that phone? And what is this emergency? She would have asked, what is this emergency that somebody must find me at every single point? And you would not have seen that we were primed to actually get to the point whereby these gadgets become what they are. Now, we are at the point whereby we are at the beginning of a new revolution in mobility. And this revolution is actually saying that moving, most of us drive our vehicles 20-30 kilometers. Okay? So from home to work, you put it in the parking. There is no better vehicle to do that with. Either you use public means or you use an electric vehicle. Because already you've reduced your carbon footprint by just doing that commute. Now, if you're using a vehicle for just personal use, everyday commute, you don't need charging infrastructure. You charge that vehicle at home, in your house, at night, when the only thing that's consuming power in your house is your fridge. Everything else is off, and maybe your phone if you've plugged it on your bedside. So that's why we have such excess power. That gives us an opportunity as a country to start leveraging on what we have, and what we have is clean, green energy. So that's the first step. Now, imagine if we could replace all these smoking matatus in the CBD just around corner here.
Did you just call them smoking matatus?
I mean, if you walk in the CBD, you can feel the soot.
Yes.
If you replace them with electric vehicles, what then have you done? One, you've dealt with noise pollution, and you've also dealt with toxic emissions in one soup. And you've given the owners more money in their pocket.
And I like the fact that you have brought in the issue of what the smoking matatus, the smoking vehicles are doing. And to give you a vivid example, look at one of the most towering hotel chain in this country, the Hilton Hotel, located at the junction of City Hall Way and Moya Avenue and Mama Gena Street. They closed their business in the CBD because they said one thing: they couldn't keep up with the noise pollution and air pollution because of that famous Kencom bus terminus that is just next door.
Yes.
Can you imagine how many people were affected by the closure of Hilton Hotel City Center? From the workers to suppliers to everybody else.
It's even a landmark in Nairobi.
And it's just a landmark.
Yes.
I mean, just the other day, I heard it is going to be turned into, what do we call those many shops?
Exhibition
centers. And I plucked off my hair. But let's not go to that direction because it'll get me angry. And I don't want to get angry. Look, can we talk about driving the growth of electric vehicles in Kenya, and at the same time taxing the component that power electric vehicles, and at the same time allowing for the importation of second-hand retired fossil vehicles from Asia in Kenya?
Those three things cannot sit in the same sentence. If we are being clear, honest, and progressive. One, I do not want to sound elitist and say we should ban second-hand vehicles, because I think the second-hand vehicles...
I think you should. I mean, they don't do this in South Africa.
Yes, but the second-hand vehicles have got us to where we are. But right now, that's going to happen naturally, because your source markets, our biggest source markets is Japan and the UK. Because of the issue we have with right-hand drive. That's our biggest. We will not be able to get those vehicles. So we cannot be waiting for electric vehicles to be 80 years old in the UK or 80 years old in Japan. Then we buy them. That will be end of life. Maybe the batteries will be degraded. So we have to actually make that initial step. So look at what Ethiopia has done. Ethiopia has decided we have so much power and very cheap power. And they've literally banned ICE vehicles. If you want to buy an ICE vehicle, it's 300-400% tax. But electric vehicles, no tax. So what they've done is they've leveraged on the resource they have, which is power, and they've said if you want an electric vehicle, that has lowered the price of electric vehicles compared to an ICE vehicle. That's happening just up here in Ethiopia.
Is it possible to do that in a politically sensitive environment like ours?
I don't think so. I think if you then show people the alternative, and right now, and if we're being honest, this is going to be driven by the two-wheelers and the public transport.
The two-wheelers?
Yes.
So
it's motorcycles, it's the border borders,
Yes.
it's your bicycles, and it's us who are doing commercial vehicles, buses and trucks. That is where the low-lying fruit will. You and I can be fickle. We want a car that can go to Mombasa, but we never drive to Mombasa. That's whenever we say, oh no, an electric vehicle cannot take me home, but we don't go home with our vehicles. So what we do is we drive them from Kileleshwa to town and park them. So I think that area of passenger vehicles, taxis is a different story. What have I seen in China? In China, they are replacing every ICE taxi with, so they're not licensing any new ICE taxis. They're only electric or hydrogen or compressed natural gas. So there's a transition. Now here we, as you say, politically, we tried to transition from 14-seaters. We've been doing that for 20 years. We've not been able to. But now the transition is going to happen whether we like it or not. Because you will not be able, in a few years, you will not be able to buy a second-hand vehicle from those markets. So you'll have to think about, will that vehicle be locally produced, or will it be an electric vehicle? And we also don't want to encourage that we become a second-hand market for electric vehicles. And that's where assembly comes in.
Yeah.
Assembly.
I think just to add on to what you said, I think transition has to be very progressive. We cannot just have, for example, tomorrow to have a policy where there's no more importation of second-hand vehicles. So it has to be progressive, but you have to give ourselves a timeline to be able to go fully green. So right now, since e-mobility is such an infant industry in Kenya, how do we protect it and nurture it so that by the time lapses, we are able to have a mature industry that can be able to serve not only Kenya but the region.
And thank you for that input. I also wanted to bring in this aspect. I mean, look, when you have 98% of all vehicles on the Kenyan roads being driven by the internal combustion engine technology, if we were to flip the coin and say that in 10 years' time we want to flip the coin and have 98% of all vehicles on Kenyan roads being EV and 2% being ICE, what then do we need to do? And what kind of political decisions do we need to make so that we ensure we get there? Because let's face it, I mean, some of these decisions, they require a lot of political sacrifice, and they require the intervention of the highest leadership in the land.
Thank you so much for that question. There's so much that you can do, but let me just major on three key items that, in my opinion, are the main barriers of entry to e-mobility. So first of all, finance. So finance, looking at it both from the supply side and the demand side. So on the demand side, you have, for example, the two-wheelers. Right now, most of them are not able to go and get asset financing to buy that electric boda. There are many innovative financial models that have come up, for example, battery as a service or pay as you go, lease to own, which also take time. Let's say over a period of, for example, 12 months, you're able to get your boda and full ownership. And then on the supply side, I think that's where we have really a lot of challenges because it's very capital intensive. So how can we have development partners or impact investors who are also aligned in the green space to be able to pump in some capital and be able to support the supply side in setting up things like infrastructure, because infrastructure is also one of the biggest challenges, just as you have mentioned. For example, the decision to drive from here to Mombasa and there are no charging points along the road. That is one of the risks that people present, that, if there's no sufficient charging points, that will make it difficult. Just the other day, I was taking an Uber that was electric, and they had to divert my route by around 3 kilometers to be able to go to a charging point. And the queue was really long. We had to wait around 15 minutes. And so in as much
and that is a cost on you.
Yes, I was excited. I'm riding on an electric taxi. However, it costed me. It costed me around 20 minutes just because of the delays at the charging point. So indeed, we have very few charging infrastructures. So can we also invest in that space, and also for these charging infrastructures to be interoperable? So that means that one operator can be able to go to the next operator and be able to also charge their vehicles, because right now one company will only go to their own charging points. So can they be used by any other operator in the market? And then
this is what we call infrastructure sharing.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course, lastly, we've dwelt on policies which are really important. So how can we have policies that incentivize more suppliers and more players into that space?
But when you're selling the message of heaven, you start with milk and honey. So you show how good heaven is. And if we were to look at the message of e-mobility, I'll show you where we are saying our biggest cost in what we import is fuel, $500 billion. Now, if we then were able to reduce that, even by 10%, that's $15 billion a month that we save in Forex. That's a lot of money. Yeah. Okay? So, and then, once now you've bought the message of going to heaven, we then now we now can tell you how difficult it is to get to heaven, because there are certain things you must do.
Yes.
Yeah, you must live by certain principles, and that's what we are doing. So we can see the bigger picture is this is where we need to do. This is where we need to go. We buy that. We've bought that big picture. Now we have to live a heavenly life to be able to get there, and that is so transition. Any transition that you say you must do tomorrow, And we know how us Kenyans are. If you tell me I have to be, for example, on E-Teams tomorrow, I'll dilly-dally.
Yeah.
But if you give me an opportunity to see the value and transit, so that this is growing as I am exiting, because there's also natural attrition. There are vehicles that actually get out of the market deliberately, I mean, by just natural attrition. If we can start replacing those with e-mobility, with non-polluting vehicles, then this gospel becomes easier to preach. But I think the fear is when you say it will happen tomorrow and it's a switch. That becomes very scary, then people then resist.
Wow, wow, wow. If you're preaching, if you want to preach the gospel of heaven, you must start from milk and honey and what else? And meat.
It's usually milk and honey. I don't know what
milk and honey.
And harps and angels singing.
Did you ever try a career on preaching? It's not too late. Good Lord. Look at the time. And we have to wind it up. But that was a great conversation, which I believe is going to help in reshaping conversations around EV. Derito, asante sana for finding time this morning to be with us on the show to help us put this conversation together with Priscilla. You people, your time is up. You're dismissed.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.